Welcome to On the Payroll, my podcast about project management, CRM such as Salesforce or Microsoft CE, doing projects in the end user environment to the consulting environment, leadership, everything under the sun that interests me. In today's episode, I talked to Justin Greenberg, and it's really interesting because Justin comes from a recruitment background and he pivoted into the Salesforce industry. I invite you to listen in to how he managed to do that and how he positioned himself to find the type of jobs that would allow him a foothold into a very interesting world. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks a lot. Hello, Justin. Welcome to my podcast called On the Payroll. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm really glad that you said yes. I know it's quite early for you down in Maryland,
Yes.
America. Okay. I like your profile because it's quite interesting, and I'm not going to steal it from thunder. Can you just walk us through a little bit about your profile and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. So I, like most, when you get out of college, you're not sure what you're going to do with your life. You're kind of at a crossroads, and one thing that I realized I should do after being a communications major was be in sales. That's that can be a lucrative position. It's challenging. And it allows me to challenge myself. So while I was in the sales industry, there was one thing that I was consistently using, regardless of what type of sales role I was in, and it was a CRM system. It wasn't necessarily Salesforce, but I really enjoyed being able to go into a CRM system and use it as my business. And as I became a recruiter, I saw the Salesforce job market and I started to understand it a little bit more. I started to make a little bit of changes and understand how it works. And although I thought I understood completely everything Salesforce related, I totally did not. But I played a little bit in Trailhead and I got some experience. And as I was recruiting, I was applying for jobs in the CRM system. So I was lucky enough to get, a government job that was related to CRM systems. And that was kind of my first breaking point in the CRM world. I was able to network, at the Salesforce Higher Ed Summit. And I was able to really just, gain experience from others. I think that's one of the most incredible parts of the Salesforce ecosystem is everybody is very, capable and willing to share their knowledge. And I think that sets us apart from any other industry, which is incredible in so many ways. I have a Slack channel right now that I'm part of. And if I have, 10 questions to ask, I get 20 different answers, which is unheard of in most industries. So that's kind of what brought me to, Salesforce. And I've kind of, since then, I've drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So it's been rewarding. It definitely has.
Thank you for that. And I just want to ask a question. When you moved from recruitment to the position with that government organization, how did you make that break? Because I think that's what a lot of people want to know, especially what happened last year with the pandemic. And there's been a lot of people who lost their jobs, and also with the very attractive, the announcement wasn't new, but the fact that Salesforce has committed to growing the sector and growing the jobs, lots of people came into the ecosystem in a way through Trailhead. Let's go and learn, let's get to understand the product, get my certifications, but they're coming from a totally different industry.
Right.
How did you break in? So that's kind of like what happened to you, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a fair question. So my role at the university, it was actually not called it wasn't a Salesforce administrator. It was called an industry alliance specialist, but it was a Salesforce administrator role. So I have on my resume Salesforce industry alliance specialist / Salesforce administrator. So I think that what people need to be able to do, especially in this competitive marketplace, is have a hybrid role and be okay with that hybrid role. And at my current job, I do Salesforce BA work, but I'm still on the sales operations side, because if you're a Salesforce BA, typically you do have a role in sales operations. It's a very integral role. And my job is to, push back and, gather requirements. And it's good that I have that sales background, because I'm able to make decisions and say, okay, well, here's how we should think about it differently. I've actually used this tool. This is how it works. This is how we're gonna, face a bump in the road. So, that's how I broke into the industry. Is I didn't just apply for Salesforce admin roles. And luckily, the role that I'm in now has completely migrated to just being a Salesforce BA. But I originally was doing sales operations as well. And I think you have to be able to compete for the value that you believe that you have. And that value is, okay, well, I'm doing both roles, but we really need to focus our efforts here, because there's a growing demand related to Salesforce. So it's really finding, I think what people need to do in this job market is be okay with going with a junior admin role. Be okay with going for a sales ops role that can, translate to Salesforce admin / Salesforce BA work. I've noticed people, in my, user groups that have done that. And it's been a tremendous amount of experience and a learning experience for a lot of people. You have to multitask. You have to think critically. You have to think, 10 steps ahead of most people, which is a good skill to have regardless of, what your title is. So that's kind of how I broke in, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So you mentioned earlier on about the BA and sales operation, that which is what you currently do. So I'm going to put a pin on that, and we'll come back to it a bit.
Sure.
So just going back to the question, and you said you were talking about hybrid roles, and that sounds very, very key to breaking in. However, I've got this question which will have two facets. One is for recruiters, and the other one is towards job seekers. And I'm looking at the role that you got at the university, and it's called Industry Alliance Specialist.
Mm-hmm.
If that was the role that was being advertised, how on earth would I know that that's a Salesforce specific role or related role? How did you find out? Was that what they advertised?
So that is what they advertised. I did a Google alert on my computer that got pushed to my phone, and anytime there was like a CRM keyword, I read that and I looked over the job. So I had two triggers. I had CRM and then I had Salesforce. So anytime that got triggered, I would get an alert and I would, apply for it. And that's really how I, put that on my radar. And with some of these jobs, and I've found this out even when we're hiring at our company, they're trying to define the job role. Sometimes people don't even know what the correct title for your position is. And I think that's what happened at University of Maryland, where I was working. They really didn't know much about Salesforce. So they put it as an industry alliance specialist, but it really was a Salesforce administrator role. So it's finding those small little, breadcrumbs and being able to capitalize on it.
I love that. I love the fact that you're using your background in recruitment to actually help you get the job that you want. And if possible, I don't know if that's possible, to just dig a little deeper into that. So bringing your recruitment hat on, how would you, and I like the tip that you provided around that Google keyword. Is there anything else? What other kind of things that you tell candidates to do when they're looking for their job, apart from the what you've just said, putting in Google Alert and keywords, what else can they do to find that job, that hybrid role that gets them a foot into where they want to end up?
Yeah, so if there's anyone on LinkedIn or any companies that you're interested in, if you connect with people, you automatically see their posts. You have one step further into that company. You have one step further into that industry. So I think that that's really important, is following companies that you're interested in, following industries that you're interested in. That can definitely give you a leg up. It's funny, there's this girl in my I have like an admin working group, and she's really brilliant, really smart. And she said, "Can you look over my resume?" So I looked over her resume, and I was like, you have 4 certifications. Like that's extremely important. Like you need to put that at the top of your list. Like you need to put that, like, your name, 4 times certified. People are looking at those things, and sometimes people have the experience, but they literally just don't know how to put it in their resume. And I think that you do need to take an investment in your resume. When I was looking over this person's, resume, I said, you're missing some things that I know you use. You use flows, you use process builders, you use validation rules. You need to put those things in your resume, because what recruiters do, because I've done it myself, is you open up someone's resume and you start searching for keywords. If those keywords aren't there, you can be missed. So, it can always go through an applicant tracking system, but there are going to be recruiters who are looking for those buzzwords, and some recruiters can be very impatient, and they're going to say, okay, those words aren't there, on to the next resume. So you just want to be sure that you're covering all those pieces. When you look at, job details, make sure that you're covering what's relevant in your own resume too, and make sure that it's accurate. So I think that's important.
Thank you. That sounds really, really quite an important tip there. Here's something slightly nuanced. So last year, a lot of the consultancies, a lot of companies laid people off, and the market was flooded with candidates. How does someone who's trying to break in make themselves rise above everybody else? That's one. Or is that even possible, just with the sheer number of people coming into the ecosystem? Is that even possible? So I understand what you say about connecting to someone on LinkedIn from a company that you're interested in, but when you are fighting against such high competition, so if I'm somebody new coming into the ecosystem, there's all these people who were laid off last year who have worked in the big 4 in consulting companies. That's going to be hoovered up first when the job market opens up.
Right.
What should I do? It just sometimes can feel quite demoralizing for someone.
No, it definitely can. I've read resumes and reviewed resumes that are impressive, and these people have not been able to get a Salesforce job. It's unfortunate. It really is. And there's no guarantee in the door, right? There's no way that you can say, all right, because you did 15, 20 trailheads, like you're going to be in Salesforce. And it's an unfortunate reality. It is. And there's the only way of really rising above that competition is getting experience. And getting experience is the hardest thing. And how you get experience is sometimes you have to take that job that doesn't have everything. It doesn't check all the boxes. And I've heard in my own admin groups, some people are unwilling to do that. Some people don't want to be able to do that. I understood that that's what I had to do to break into the industry, and I was willing to accept that. And it's a decision, right? Because everybody wants that admin, salary, but you have to, climb those stairs, or climb the ladder, so to speak, to get there. And there's no guarantee. There is no guarantee. I've had people in, my group who have submitted 200, plus resumes, and eventually they have, gotten jobs, but it's hard. I mean, there's no way around it. It's a tough market.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that candid response.
Sure.
And so let's just focus on the first job that you got in the ecosystem.
Sure.
How did you find it, and what did you have any expectations that were met or weren't met? Like, I didn't realize I could do this in this role.
Yeah. So, do you mean when I first got into Salesforce, like what my kind of expectations were?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll admit, I was pretty naive. I thought if I was making, a field change, I was a good, Salesforce system admin. There was so much I didn't know. I went to this Salesforce Higher Ed Summit and realized there were so many technologies. There were so many things I was unaware of. So one thing I actually did, because I realized after that conference I knew nothing, is I got a lot of business cards from different universities, and I contacted everyone who had a presentation, almost everyone who had a presentation that I attended, at the Higher Ed Summit. And I was able to bring that back to the university that I worked for. And, I didn't take credit for it. It was, people who, really got great intel from. So I was able to learn through that way. And one thing that I learned, in my career, in the Salesforce ecosystem is that I was doing Salesforce work, but I was also doing, other work on top of that. I was managing the campaigns. I was making sure that people got, email communication. So you have to be, to some level of understanding that when you first break into the Salesforce, ecosystem, it's not just going to be 100% Salesforce, or at least it wasn't for me. And I was okay with that. But it's definitely challenging, being able to, draw a line in the sand and say, here are my roles. Here's what I'm willing to go outside and do. Because I think at a university and smaller companies, you often have to, perform duties and responsibilities that are outside that, that responsibility. So that's what I learned, is that whenever you accept a job, you're always going to do more that's outside those job descriptions. And I think that I think people need to be able to accept that in order to break into the ecosystem, because it's a challenging market. It really, really is.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I'd like to ask now about how you took the step from there to your current role.
Sure. So I was not certified at the university. I was doing sales ops, and I was doing 20% Salesforce work. And they, my company realized, the work I was doing was pretty significant. The projects were increasing. Everything was kind of just, when you I worked for the company that I work for now. At the time I was hired was 20 people. Now it's grown to 90 people. So, yeah, it's grown tremendously. With that growth, there has to be more defined, clarification, on what you do. How I grew was taking on projects, taking on responsibility, and, drawing a line in the sand when I felt comfortable in doing that, and saying, we need to work on these projects. We need to, I need to take off the sales ops hat for the time being and really make these priorities. So, and I will say it's still a challenge. People say, oh, can you do this? Can you do that? So I still go back to sales ops, and I still, do Salesforce BA. So my roles still are a little bit muddy, to be honest with you, but I've accepted it. I think I hear that all the time though, in the Salesforce ecosystem. You're often kind of doing multiple things at any given time. Multitasking is absolutely critical. I've accepted it. I've embraced it. It's allowed me to be who I am today. And, I would say it's made me a stronger, Salesforce BA.
So when you say BA, tell me what exactly do you mean by that in your term?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because everybody has different terms. I was on what's that new app? What is it called? Sound. What is it? What's that new app that everybody's on right now? Clubhouse.
Clubhouse.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was on Clubhouse and somebody was talking about product owners. And everybody had a different definition of product owners, which I thought was funny. And I was like, based off your definition, I am a product owner. But a Salesforce BA, my role is to, gather requirements to make sure that everybody understands, if we make a decision like this, here is what will happen, positive or negative. My role is to gather requirements. And this isn't, in my opinion, this isn't typical for Salesforce BA, but my role also is bringing forth that solution to say, here are the requirements, here are the steps to do that, here's all the parties involved for sign off and execution, and then here's what we need to do to ensure that this project is met, successfully. And mapping is so critical. Mapping is probably something at University of Maryland I did not do with mapping. In my role now, I am constantly mapping. I'm constantly over communicating. If there's one small change that needs to be made, I can guarantee you there's 5 emails behind it that are going over why we're doing this. And documentation, oh my God, is critical. And I can tell you that my weakness is organization, but I would say being a Salesforce BA, it's critical, it's paramount. Like, you need to be able to document everything. That's why I have folders upon folders upon folders of documentation. So that's my role as a Salesforce BA. I know I rambled, but that's my best.
No, that's okay. Sorry, I'm just taking a couple of notes because I want to come back to them and ask you a question. So just going back to what you were saying, what triggers the change that is required? You talk about your role being to gather requirements. What triggers that? Is it an internal, you think, oh, there's this process that needs to be better, or is it user driven?
That's a really good question. It's a little bit of both. It's user driven, and then if I think, that something needs to change, I will alert, leadership and say, I really think this needs to be changed. And I always have to, bring in a meeting and document the steps of why, I do a pros and cons with everything I do. Here's what we do today. Here's the pros and cons of it. Here's what we can do tomorrow. And here's the pros and cons of it. I try to keep it really simple. I think that's really important. Keep things simple. Because if you go too complex, you lose everybody. You lose everybody. Just the other day, I was going over, a recommendation to create like a new record type in our org. And I realized that sometimes I just, don't explain things all the time. And I was like, I need to write out this definition so people understand what a record type is. So I actually did that. So over explaining things is really important. And yeah, I would say that the changes, I can make internal changes if there's like a validation rule or something, but a real significant change, loop everybody in, have a big giant meeting, and then over document everything related to that meeting is kind of my steps. And then make sure at the end, it's similar to sales, make sure at the end you capture those next steps. You get those next steps before that call ends. And you make sure that everybody understands what their responsibilities are. And that's kind of how I, execute changes, if you will.
So earlier on, you said the word mapping, and I think you used it in a way that I'm not used to using it. You said in your previous role, you didn't focus on mapping. In your current role, you just do mapping all the time. But my understanding from the way that you've explained it is communication, or is it not that? What do you mean when you say mapping?
So you map communication, but you also map processes. So, for example, if you're making a record type change, I map out exactly what we are making changes to. So when a record type is created, this is the fields that are going to go in there. This is the reporting that's going to be affected. These are the users that we need to engage with. And that's what I mean by mapping, is having that total encompassing solution, if you will.
Right. So you're putting details into it. What are
Yes.
the details to be communicated? What's the details of the change of this record type? What's the exact things or the processes that's going to change as a result of this thing that you're trying to do?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. The other thread I got from your early answer was around documentation. You say the organization is your weak point, but documentation is important. How do you document, and how do you store that documentation, and how do you socialize the documents you have?
Really good question. So, for my company, we have a BRD form, so business requirements document. So everyone, it's their responsibility to read that business requirements document. And it's everyone's responsibility, who's part of that meeting, to sign off on that document. If there's any change that needs to be made after we've already gone through the business requirements document, which does happen 8 times out of 10, a change management request form is created, and then a new BRD version, business requirements document form, is created to implement that change process. And I hate documentation more than anybody, but it's really important. It really is. It saves your own, self when, you're going through, and communicating with people who have technical knowledge and also people who don't have technical knowledge. It saved me in more ways than one. You go back to the business requirements document, you're like, well, this was said here. This is out of scope. And I'm sure you've dealt with that as a consultant. Well, we can do this, but it's out of scope. We can work on this, but just understand this wasn't articulated. So that's how we go through that process.
Okay. No, thank you for that. It sounds though that the way that you are executing change is quite ad hoc. Would that be right? Or do you say, right, we're going to look at putting releases or a bunch of changes in every so often and go, right, the next time we're going to do this, we're going to maybe record change and maybe something else. Would you bundle them, or would they be different pieces of BRDs that you'd have to store somewhere?
Well, I have a significant amount of projects, and so right now I'm focused on 3 priority projects, and I wouldn't say they're ad hoc. I would say that the changes are pretty strategic, and like, what's our priorities first, what isn't a priority, and we don't want to submit the last thing I want to do is have a change management request form. But what does happen is people, once you build the solution, I think the light bulbs start going off for other people. And, well, we can do this. Well, we can do that. And when you work for a company that, is comprised of 80 people, and it's not a 300, person company, the advantage is you have someone, like me, who can make those changes quickly. There's pros to that, and there's also cons to that, where you can make changes quickly. If you make changes quickly, you just need to make sure that everybody's on board with that, that request. And that can be difficult, because everybody just wants things done. We live in a time where people just want things done now. But it's our job as a Salesforce BA to be like, well, we can do this now, but you need to understand what's behind this change. What will happen if we do this change? So I very well document, if this change happens, these are the ramifications. These, are the actionable next steps I need from you. And this is what will happen once we've made those changes. So I wouldn't say it's ad hoc, but they come in fast, the requests, they do.
So right now you're a team of one to manage this.
Yeah, there's one other person getting hired actually today.
Okay.
Yeah.
That will make your life a bit easier and to manage. In my world, what you're doing, you're the product owner, you're the BA, you're the Salesforce admin, you're also the key stakeholder as well as the champion. So that's like 5 jobs rolled into one. And you've got competing priorities, it sounds like. So not only do you have to manage the stakeholders, say, hang on, 3 of you have asked for 3 different competing changes. I now have to sit down and think about all of it and impact of all of it, and then synthesize a proposal or recommendation. But then once you have put forth your argument and you have got a response or decision, then you've got to action it as well. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I have 5 jobs in one. Yeah, no, that's pretty accurate.
What do you find the most enjoyable part about what you currently do?
I love completing a project. It's euphoric. It really is. Sometimes I look back at a project and I'm like, that was tough. That was tough. But I mean, I consider myself, I'm not trying to boast or anything, but I consider myself pretty tough. But Salesforce has made me tougher. And these projects sometimes they can beat you down. They can. But it's our job to rise above that. It's our job to over communicate. It's our job to, be professional and be courteous, and for our non-technical, users, be able to articulate what they can't. And I try to pretend that my mom's in the room and I'm talking to my mom about Salesforce. I try to envision that because I am not a consultant, but I often sometimes feel like a consultant at my role, where I'm saying, well, that's not really how it works. Like, I'm sure you've heard, well, can you just put a custom object into Salesforce? And you're like, well, yeah, you can always put a custom object into Salesforce, but is that going to help you? That's something that's enjoyable, is being able to, talk to non-technical users, get their buy-in, get their excitement on it, and also complete a project. Completing a project's like crossing the finish line. It's a gratifying feeling.
Yes.
You got here, checks in the mail, not for me, but this is what I get paid for. It's what my job entails. It's to complete these projects successfully. And we have, at my company, we have meetings that wrap up, projects. And it was great when we had a wrap-up call regarding a renewals project, because I'm in, healthcare insurance, and everyone, was like, I think everything went great. And I will be honest, that doesn't always happen, but it is a gratifying feeling when that does happen, because you know what you need to do next time to make sure that the same things happen again. I think you do this as well, is you look at what's been a good project versus what's been a bad project. And if somebody tells you that they've had all perfect projects, they're lying. They're just lying. So I am proud of, those struggles that have turned out to be great wins.
Fantastic. I can imagine. When you look back at all the projects that you've done, so if you follow my content, I talk about the good projects and the character building ones.
Yeah.
If you look at those that were the character building ones, what were the things that you felt what were the kind of lessons you took away from it to make sure that you didn't have to repeat those experiences again?
I think over communicating, even when I think, never assume, like literally never assume. And I mean in everything, like never assume people understand what you're saying. I think that's one thing I've learned is I'm like, oh, well, you know, everybody's smart in this room. Everybody understands everything I'm saying. But sometimes people just want to get on to the next meeting. They want to move on. And I totally get that. I can be impatient myself because obviously I want to get the project, you know, crossed off, but also you want to do it the right way. And I think what's difficult in any type of environment is you have a team, you have different experiences, and everybody has different expectations. And that's been my learning lesson is, you know, how could I have communicated better? How could I have looped this person in differently? Because, you know, we work in a crazy environment right now. We're just getting around the bend, in my opinion, with COVID. Everybody's working from home. And I feel like there's a tremendous amount of stress. And I think that with that being said, you know, people have their own, you know, agendas. They have their own, you know, things, you know, interpersonally that are going on. So I try to take that into consideration when we have projects. And, you know, I've heard in calls before where, you know, somebody's talking to their dog and they're not muted. So you have to take those things, you know, you have to listen to those bells that go off and be like, well, did you hear this? And just over communicate. I think that's really important. And it's still something I struggle with is, you know, some people will, you know, be like, why is he asking these questions? Well, it's my job to ask those questions. We have to make sure that we get to that end goal. So yeah, does that make sense?
It does. It does. I was just wondering, have you ever had to work with a partner to get things done? Did you ever need a piece of code or tell me about that? Do you have a specific partner you go to all the time or?
No, I don't. We did have a partner we used for Cogna. And I don't want to name that partner. It did not go too well, to be honest with you. They were not very accommodating, but I also think that our organization has high expectations, and you know, our meetings sometimes, you know, carried on for, you know, longer than expected. And I think that becomes a challenge in the consultant world. They have, you know, an hour of time, you know, everything is very regimented. When you know, work for a company like mine, we ask questions. We, you know, sometimes continue on longer than expected. We had, you know, a business requirements meeting, and not everybody was in that business requirements meeting. So I wouldn't say it was actually the consultant's fault. I would say that a learning lesson is if, you know, not everyone in that meeting can come to those meetings, don't have the meeting. Seriously, don't have the meeting. And I don't think that was the consultant's fault. I think that was a learning lesson from us. Like, there was one person in that group where they were trusted to, you know, be the decision maker, and they clearly weren't understanding the, you know, technology and the decision making behind it. And we used that consultant, but besides that, we haven't really used a consultant aside from Cogno.
So if you had to in the future, what would you change?
Ooh, good question. I think it's great when you have, you know, 10, 12 people in a meeting, but I also think there's a negative aspect to that. Too many cooks in the kitchen. I would say a more refined list of key stakeholders. And one thing that I like that consultants do, I've realized, is record meetings. I think that's a good practice so that you can play back, you know, what's being said. You can, you know, dictate notes and kind of review the tape. You know, that's one thing I would do differently is have, I think 12 people in a requirements gathering meeting is just bound to be a problem. but that's what I would do differently. And I also, it's hard to, be able to say to people, you need to be in this meeting or we just shouldn't have it. That's a difficult conversation to have. But I think sometimes those need to be, said. Like if we're meeting with this consultant, we're getting billed by this consultant and you need to be in this meeting. It's, people just think about, their, the project, it costs 30 grand, for example. But if you don't go to those meetings, it's going to cost more than 30 grand. It quickly builds up. I mean, I talk to consultants every day. They're like, well, we didn't get all the requirements. So that 30K project turned into a 50K project. And I think about that all the time. I don't think people fully understand that, but less people over communicating and sometimes playing back the tape, seeing, exactly, what happened in that call and, what you can do to kind of just be the referee and over communicate, actionable next steps.
Is it okay if I share some of my thoughts on this particular topic?
Yeah, please.
If I was doing a project and I had the freedom and flexibility to have conversations with the customer before we sign on any statement of works. So if my focus is on helping this customer get to a very successful endpoint, and not think about, oh, okay, I'm a consulting partner, I should find a way to bill as much as I can. That's not what all partners do, but at the back of their mind, this is a business. But if I were to just focus on success and I look at the different companies, different clients that I'm going into, what I do is I would look at the political landscape as well as the influence that my peer, so it'd be the IT project manager or the Salesforce Admin or somebody like yourself, for example, that I would be interfacing with, and I'd look at the knowledge and the influence that you have in your domain. And depending on how much influence you have internally is how I would say for yourself. So you are quite knowledgeable about the system. You've been there for a while. You put in a lot of changes. You do the business case for all the things that you want, and you do the selling of that business case. And then once the proposal is accepted, you build it out. So you have influence, you have competence, you have influence. What I would advise is that in order to, if you have a piece of work that requires consultants to do, like a developer or something, is that you'd have to take on a big part of the consulting role, which is to gather at least part of the requirement, at least the process mapping. And then when you see the consultants, when they come to your site, is you reduce the number of people because you've already spoken to, let's say, 12, and you think that, okay, for 4 of you, I understand what you want, I will represent you. And then so it'll be 6 plus yourself, 7, which is a little bit more manageable. And the 4 that you pick might be those that are a little bit more easygoing, maybe. Those that would be happy for you to represent them and maybe okay with whatever outcome that comes out at the end. So that way you narrow it down a little bit.
I completely agree. We did a business requirements document, but it slowly turned into, well, can we get a rainbow, over the unicorn, and with 12 people, and there's way too many cooks in the kitchen. So I do agree with you. To have 4 people going over the process, making sure it's mapped out before it gets in the consultant's hand is critical. I mean, it's critical. So I completely agree with that.
Okay. No, that's quite interesting to hear, folks. It sounds like your company, you being the only one there, you've got to referee everybody and everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Towards the end of the podcast, what I like to do is I like to ask a little bit more what I call the user manual, or the YUM, basically. And I like this idea because then it allows people to understand you a little bit more, or for me
Okay.
to understand you a bit more and to understand how you work. Okay. Right. What are some raw, unfiltered truths about yourself that maybe other people don't know?
Unfiltered truths about myself. Hmm. I'm impatient. You know, I am. I'm a relentless individual. I don't stop until I get, the solution or it's crossed off my list. I would say I'm relentless and determined. Um, Unfiltered truths about myself. Um, hmm. The third one is the unfiltered truth. I'm a triplet. Yeah. And not many people know about that. And I think that that gives me perspective when I'm, trying to, talk to different people. I have two sisters, and I feel like that's given me good interpersonal experiences, not always, thinking that I understand people and I'm asking those questions. And, I always talk to people, like, when we spoke on LinkedIn, I think that the unfiltered truth is I don't know everything in Salesforce. I don't pretend to. And I think that that's what allows me to be good at what I do is always just asking questions. I don't care if you're a 16-time certified Salesforce expert. You still need to ask questions. And that's something that I will always do regardless of if I have one certification or 18. Is always just ask those questions and, admit in calls sometimes you don't know, you don't have the answer. And I don't always have the answer. And I think we as Salesforce professionals need to be okay with saying that. We don't have the answer, but we'll find out. We sure will. And I would say that those are my unfiltered truths.
I like that. I like that. Thank you.
Sure.
What are you great at?
I'm great at, communicating to people, this is what we need, from a non-technical standpoint to a technical standpoint. I'm good at boiling it down. And I think that in Salesforce, you can have conversations with people and you're like, well, what did you just say? And being able to translate it to non-technical people, like I said, I try to pretend like my mom's in the room, like talking to my mom about Salesforce. She thinks I work for Salesforce. I don't work for Salesforce. As many times as I've spoken to her. But it's important to be able to talk to non-technical users and be able to make sure that they're comfortable with, what you're saying. So I'm good with that. I would say that, I'm good with, making sure that our org is secure. I would say I'm really good with security and process builder and workflows. I'm not good at flows. I'm still learning on flows. That's a complicated one for me. But I would say that I'm really good at solution building. I'm really good at, being an admin, being a BA, getting those user requirements and making sure that everybody's on board. I think what's not, seen on a job description is communication skills critical, but communication skills are absolutely critical. And I would say that's definitely a strength of mine.
Okay, definitely. I think if we look at the transcript and look at how many times you say the word communication, I think that would be one of the biggest keywords that pop out. I totally agree, 100%.
Yeah.
Not only to outward, but also absorbing what people are saying. So you talk about asking the right questions. It also sounds like you do very good listening as well, and to make sure that everyone is heard. What are some of the quirks that you might have?
Quirks. I joke a lot. And I think that it's okay to joke. It really is, but you also need to be sensitive to, other people and make sure that, you're not offending anyone. And I think in today's society, you want to make sure you have the right jokes, obviously.
That's true.
Uh,
That's true.
but in my world, it's stressful. It is. And sometimes breaking through that stress is a joke. Breaking through that stress is changing your wallpaper on, when you're on a Zoom call. Like, I remember there was a colleague and I, we were working on a project. We were stressed out as could be. We had those Bernie Sanders memes. You have to be able to, just have fun when you're working through the stress. And, I'm saying this advice now, and I can tell you that I don't always practice this because the stress sometimes does get, pretty, it gets up there. So those are my quirks is, I joke around a lot. I have fun. And I would say I'm particular. There are things in my Salesforce org where people are like, can you change this? And I don't want to, but if people, are talking to me and there's more people involved, I'm okay with that. I would say as a Salesforce product owner, you want to protect your org. You don't just want to make these changes. So I would say that those are my quirks. But I mean, I'm not the most quirky guy, but I definitely joke around sometimes.
Okay. One last question before we wrap up. What are the values that you hold highest in regard?
Honesty is the most important, attribute in my opinion. I would rather somebody mess up 10 times and say they messed up 10 times than lie about, what happened, because we can fix what happened typically, but we can't fix somebody who's lying. That's my opinion. Integrity, if you say you're going to do something, make sure you do it. Make sure, that you're holding yourself accountable and others accountable. And honesty, integrity, and just dedication. Be dedicated to the work that you do. If you say that this is your deadline and you don't meet it, that's okay. But just articulate, what your next step. Yeah. I would say that that's really important, not only in the Salesforce ecosystem, but just in life,
Absolutely.
And I mean, I would rather have somebody making 10 mistakes than somebody not being honest about, what's happening. Because I think you can train somebody to not make those mistakes, but you can't train somebody to not lie, and we see things in Salesforce every day, what people are doing. We know how to track things. We know how to track, when a user logs in. So if somebody says, I didn't get this on, 325, we know if that user's logged in. Sometimes I don't think people know that. So there's a fine line between, being able to call people out and then just being able to, just take it in and, maybe use it as a learning experience for the end user.
Okay. Thank you so much, Justin. This has been really, really enjoyable. I particularly loved hearing about your journey from where you were in the recruitment world into the Salesforce ecosystem. I love the tips that you provided, the challenges and the fun bits about your current role and how you manage the users and how you value integrity, honesty, and communication.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pei, for speaking with me. I know we've spoken, via LinkedIn, but it's great to, meet you virtually. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thank you for making the time so early in your morning for me. I think we've been trying to find a suitable time. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.